The climate crisis, it looms large for all of us, governments, businesses, individuals.
Absolutely. It's everywhere.
And companies, well, they're absolutely under the microscope to do their part,
Right.
especially cutting greenhouse gas emissions.
Huge pressure.
But here's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How do we actually push corporate leaders beyond just good intentions or clever PR stunts?
Yeah, beyond the greenwashing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What truly lights a fire under them to make deep, meaningful changes to, reduce their carbon footprint?
It's the core challenge, definitely. And today, we're taking a deep dive into this, well, truly groundbreaking study that zeroes in on a surprising, powerful lever.
Okay.
It's the link between how top executives are paid and a company's actual carbon performance.
The money trail.
Pretty much. We've gone through this extensive research, and I mean extensive. It crunched data from over 13,000 observations.
Wow.
Yeah, 1,122 firms, 28 countries, over 18 years to sort of extract the most important nuggets for you.
Okay, so our mission today then is to help you understand what really drives corporate environmental responsibility.
Yeah.
Beyond those glossy sustainability reports.
Exactly. Get past the surface.
So the big question we're tackling is, can executive compensation effectively promote carbon mitigation? And, if so, what specific conditions need to be in place for that?
Right. Conditions both inside the company and, within the country it operates in. It's a fascinating puzzle.
Definitely sounds like it. Where do we start?
Okay, let's unpack this core connection. Executive pay and carbon performance. Because the study makes a crucial distinction right off the bat.
Okay.
It looks at two different dimensions of carbon performance.
Right, and this is important. First, there's what they call process-oriented carbon performance, or CRI.
CRI. Yeah.
Which stands for Carbon Reduction Initiatives. Think of these as a company's symbolic commitments.
Their efforts. Exactly. It's about what they say they're doing. Investing in renewables, improving energy efficiency, reducing toxic chemicals.
Having formal policies, making environmental investments, that kind of thing.
Precisely. So a higher CRI score just means they're initiating more of these efforts. Lots of activity.
Rocket initiatives. But then there's the other side.
And then there's outcome-oriented carbon performance, or INT. This is the really tangible part.
The results.
Yes. Measuring a company's actual carbon intensity, specifically greenhouse gas emissions relative to sales.
Okay, so this is about real quantifiable results.
Exactly. A lower carbon intensity score means better performance, fewer emissions per unit of output. It's about the substantive, measurable impact.
Right, because you can have all the initiatives in the world, but if your actual emissions aren't going down, well, what's the point?
That's the crux of it.
So with those two types of performance in mind, CRI and INT, here's where it gets really interesting, you said.
Yes, the study found that executive compensation, the total pay package for senior execs, it has this dual effect.
Okay, dual effect. How so?
On one hand, there's a clear positive association with CRI, those carbon reduction initiatives.
So higher executive pay is linked to more of these symbolic actions, more initiatives.
Correct. And this aligns with what's known in neo-institutional theory as the legitimation perspective.
Legitimation meaning?
It basically suggests companies undertake these visible environmental actions primarily to gain social acceptance, meet stakeholder expectations.
To look good?
Essentially, yeah. To look environmentally responsible. Maintain their social license to operate, if you will.
Okay, so they're trying to look good. That makes sense. I get that. But what about the actual measurable impact? Does the pay just drive the window dressing, or does it go deeper?
That's the absolutely fascinating part. The study also found that higher executive compensation is negatively associated with poor outcome-oriented carbon performance.
Hang on. Negatively associated with poor performance. So positively associated with good performance.
Exactly. What this really means is that more executive pay is linked to lower carbon intensity.
Lower emission.
And better actual greenhouse gas emission reductions. Real results.
Whoa. Okay. So it's not just about appearances then. That kind of challenges what I might have instinctively thought.
It really does. This particular finding supports another view, sometimes called the efficiency perspective.
Efficiency perspective.
It suggests that when designed correctly, compensation packages can truly incentivize executives to undertake substantive, meaningful GHG abatement projects.
Projects that deliver real environmental benefits.
Exactly. And often potentially financial ones, too. This is a big deal because, like you said, maybe prior research Often implied compensation mostly drove symbolic stuff.
Right, the greenwashing fear.
But this study shows it can absolutely drive genuine, measurable change, substantive change.
So the critical insight here, for you listening, is transformative. Executive pay isn't merely a line item for financial performance anymore.
Not at all.
This study reveals it's a potent, maybe underutilized lever that can literally shift corporate environmental efforts from just looking green to, well, actually being greener.
Yeah.
So for you, it means looking at executive compensation isn't just about fairness. It's about seeing a company's true commitment to the planet.
Absolutely. Now, beyond just the direct paycheck, the internal machinery of a company, its corporate governance mechanisms.
Right, the internal rules and structures.
They play a crucial role in amplifying or may dampening these effects. Think of the board of directors as the company's internal steering wheel,
Guiding the executives.
responsible for guiding executives towards decisions that meet all stakeholder needs, and that includes environmental performance.
Okay. And the study didn't just look at the board in general, right? It drilled down into specifics.
It did. 5 specific board characteristics that truly influence this executive compensation carbon performance link.
Okay, let's break those down. First up, board size. What did they find there?
Well, larger boards, perhaps because they have a broader range of expertise and perspectives.
Or viewpoints.
Right. They're more likely to strengthen the connection between executive pay and both the symbolic initiatives and the actual emission reductions. More minds at the table, maybe more accountability.
That makes sense. Okay, what about independent directors? We hear a lot about the importance of independence on boards.
Absolutely critical. Boards with a higher proportion of independent non-executive directors, those less influenced by internal management.
The outsiders.
Kind of. They're also more likely to tie executive compensation to both types of carbon performance. They tend to advocate for long-term value, and increasingly that includes sustainability.
So they're less likely to just rubber stamp what management wants.
That's the idea. They provide more objective oversight.
Then there's CEO-chair duality.
Hmm.
When the CEO is also the board chair, that concentrates power. Does separating those roles make a difference for environmental goals?
It definitely seems to. When the roles of CEO and board chair are separated, it strengthens board independence, prevents one person dominating.
Right, avoids the imperial CEO situation.
Exactly, and this separation was found to reinforce the link between executive compensation and both the carbon reduction initiatives and the actual emissions. Adds another layer of checks and balances.
Interesting. Okay, this one often sparks debate. Gender diversity on the board. How did that play out here?
Well, the finding aligns with other research suggesting boards with more women are linked to stronger sustainability practices.
Okay.
But what's particularly compelling here is that the study found gender-diverse boards specifically tend to tie compensation incentives to substantive, outcome-oriented performance.
So focused on the actual results.
Yes, like actual GHG emissions reductions rather than just the symbolic actions. It suggests the focus on real, measurable impact.
Very interesting. And finally, sustainability committees. Is having a dedicated committee just like a formality? Or does it genuinely matter for incentives?
It seems to be far from a formality. The presence of a dedicated board-level sustainability committee signals a firm's serious commitment. They're putting resources behind it.
Shows intent.
Right. And much like gender diversity, this mechanism appears to prioritize linking compensation directly to substantive carbon performance improvements. Again, focused on results.
So they're putting their money, or the exec's money, where their environmental mouth is.
That's a good way to put it.
So the practical takeaway for you here is immense. If you're an investor, an employee, or just someone concerned about corporate impact. These board characteristics are tangible indicators. Knowing if a company has a larger board, more independent directors, separated roles, gender diversity, or a sustainability committee,
It gives you clues.
it can give you a much clearer picture of its genuine commitment to environmental stewardship. These aren't just governance buzzwords. They're vital clues about real priorities.
Very true. But the story doesn't end inside the company's walls.
Right. You mentioned the external environment matters too.
Hugely. Corporate behavior isn't just shaped by internal factors, it's also heavily influenced by the external environment, specifically the quality of national governance. Things like a country's legal frameworks, political stability, regulatory quality, how well corruption is controlled, the whole system they operate in.
Okay, I can see how that would matter. If a country has super strict environmental laws, companies probably have to comply anyway, right? Regardless of exec pay.
You'd think so. But the study found something a little counterintuitive here, actually.
Oh, do tell.
Well, for the symbolic carbon performance, remember, the CRI, those initiatives?
Yeah, the gestures.
The study found no significant moderating effect from national governance quality on the link between pay and those initiatives.
No effect. Why not?
The thinking is, in countries with already strong governance, the focus is already on actual performance. Companies are often pushed by existing regulations to deliver real results, not just make gestures.
So the external pressure for tangible outcomes is already high.
Exactly. Making additional pay incentives just for symbolic actions kind of less impactful or necessary.
Okay, so if the government is already acting as a strict referee, adding a little bonus for trying doesn't change much. The goal is already results.
Precisely. Now, for outcome-oriented carbon performance, the actual carbon intensity, the INT,
The real emissions.
here's the kicker. In countries with high national governance quality, firms achieve better carbon outcomes without relying heavily on executive compensation incentives for it.
Wait, without the pay incentive.
Yeah. The robust regulatory frameworks and societal expectations already create such strong external pressure.
The system itself forces their hand.
Right. It makes additional compensation incentives for that specific outcome less critical. Compliance is primarily driven by those strong regulations and expectations.
That's wild. It's almost like in some countries the government acts as the stern parent, so the company doesn't need to, I don't know, bribe its executives to clean their carbon room.
That's a great analogy.
Yes.
But in others,
Conversely, in countries with weak national governance institutions.
when the rules are lax or not enforced. Exactly. That's where executive compensation emerges as a key driver of substantive carbon performance improvements.
So the internal incentive fills the gap.
Precisely. Firms in these regions rely more on internal incentive mechanisms like pay tied to emissions to compensate for the lack of stringent regulatory enforcement and external pressure. It essentially fills a regulatory void.
Okay, so for you, as you evaluate a company's environmental efforts, it's not just about their internal policies. You have to look at the context.
Absolutely critical.
Consider the country they operate in. In some places, strong government oversight might be doing the heavy lifting, reducing the need for direct pay incentives for real change. But in others, executive pay becomes a crucial internal lever to watch for genuine, verifiable impact. Context is everything.
It really is, which leads us nicely into the practical implications.
Right. What does this all mean on the ground?
Well, for investors and practitioners, this deep dive provides a powerful new lens. It shows you how to identify firms that genuinely align executive pay with environmental goals.
And critical.
This alignment isn't just about doing good, right? The research strongly suggests it signals long-term sustainability and potentially even improved financial performance. It's a marker of smart management.
Good governance spilling over. And for policymakers and regulators, what's the message?
The path forward seems clearer. This research highlights the value, perhaps even the necessity, of mandating the inclusion of specific, measurable carbon reduction targets within executive compensation structures.
And make it a rule.
It's a proven mechanism, the study suggests, to drive more meaningful climate action and help achieve those big global emission reduction goals. It puts teeth into commitments.
Okay, and for the firms themselves.
Yeah.
Especially those operating globally.
The message is one of strategic adaptation. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Companies operating across diverse countries need to tailor their executive compensation strategies. In strong governance environments, maybe moderate incentives suffice because of those existing regulatory pressures.
The system helps.
But in weaker governance environments, more substantial executive incentives, directly tied to measurable carbon outcomes, become critical to truly move the needle and compensate for any regulatory gaps.
So flexibility is key. You need to read the room country by country.
Absolutely, you really do.
And zooming out on a broader societal level, what does this study tell us?
I think it really drives home the point that financial incentives aren't just for maximizing short-term profits anymore. That's maybe an outdated view.
They can be tools for good.
They can be powerfully leveraged as tools for environmental responsibility. This research, I think, helps shift public perception by demonstrating that corporate incentives can, and do, actively contribute to global climate mitigation when designed properly.
Interesting. Okay, so great insights, but like all good research, it probably opens up more questions too, right? Where could future work go?
Oh, definitely. While this study is incredibly valuable, it does have limitations that point to future exploration. It primarily focused on large, publicly listed firms.
The big players.
Right, in 28 countries, mostly from developed regions.
A great foundation, but what about, say, smaller companies?
Yeah.
Or those in developing regions like the Middle East, India, South Africa,
Mhm.
places with very different institutional environments?
Exactly. How does this play out there? And a question I have is about the type of compensation.
Ah, yeah. Does it matter how executives are paid?
Right. Does a fixed salary versus stock options or maybe long-term versus short-term incentives, do those influence carbon performance differently? The study didn't differentiate compensation types in that level of detail.
That feels like a whole other layer of complexity.
It really could be. Future research could also explore other governance dimensions beyond just board structures.
Like what?
Maybe the role of shareholder activism, external regulatory oversight beyond just that national governance quality score, or even the impact of specific industry pressures. There's so much more to learn.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've really journeyed from the global urgency of climate change down to the fascinating nuanced role of executive compensation, seeing how a company's internal setup, its governance, and even the national rules it operates under can shape its true environmental impact.
Right.
It's a complex dance.
It really is. And the big takeaway, I think, is undeniably clear. Getting executive incentives right.
Aligning pay with the planet.
Yes. Coupled with robust, thoughtfully designed governance, it can be an incredibly powerful force for actual carbon reduction, not just symbolic gestures. It's about aligning ambition with real action.
So knowing all this, here's something to chew on. What other internal mechanisms beyond just compensation do you think could be effectively leveraged to drive real substantive change in corporate environmental performance, especially in those contexts where external regulations might be weak or absent? And maybe more personally, how might you, as an informed individual, apply these insights
Yeah, how do you use this?
in your own spheres of influence? Whether that's as a consumer choosing where to buy, an employee pushing for change within your company, or maybe an advocate for smarter environmental policies. Lots to think about.